So now that you know characteristics of fad diets, I'm going to talk about two popular diets and let you decide if you think they're fads or if they're here to stay. One of my favorite sayings in nutrition, and I have a lot of them, is keep an open mind but not so open that your brains fall out. So we take an evidence-based approach when evaluating nutrition information and use critical thinking skills, which is look at all sides of the issues, look at all of the evidence, and make an unbiased opinion based on an objective evaluation of the research. Sometimes we have to wait till there's enough research to be convinced of an opinion, and again, we need to be open to change. So I'm going to talk about these two diets and the evidence around them. So first we'll talk about the keto diet or the ketogenic diet. It's been around for over 100 years, since the 1920s. It's been used and is still used to this day as a treatment for seizure disorders, especially in children who don't respond to seizure medication. And it can be effective in reducing seizures in people with seizure disorders. It has more recently, in the early 1990s, bodybuilders started using it. It started being adopted by the hardcore bodybuilding community to cut body fat before competitions. When I lived in Denver, I moved there 2008, I had a lot of students that participated in what's called figure competitions, which is not really bodybuilding, but something kind of similar to that. And I remember a student in class was doing a very low carbohydrate diet during the semester to cut for a competition. But anyway, that's when it became more widespread, was in the early 90s. And then it really took off in 2013 when an article was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal indicating that the keto diet could trigger anti-inflammatory and antioxidant genes. So, there was some thinking that there might be some benefits to the ketogenic diet. So then the biohackers, which is a new term added to our lexicon, became woke and adopted it to thinking that they would switch to the primary use of fat for fuel, and ketones actually do have an appetite suppressing effect. So then, it increased in popularity, after that 2013 article, not just for the anti-inflammatory effects, but because if you don't have available carbohydrate on a very low carb diet, you're going to have to use fat for fuel. And ketones do suppress the appetite. So it really took off in 2015, and health claims included it would be beneficial for weight loss, blood glucose control, cancer prevention, athletic performance, acne, neurological disorders, inflammation, and anti-aging. So the data that are available, the research is difficult to interpret because a lot of the studies are on low carbohydrate diets, not necessarily ketogenic diets, which vary from 40% calories as carb, which is kind of like a South Beach or zone type diet. Remember the current acceptable macronutrient distribution range indicates that 45 to 65% of your calories should come from carbs, so that's not that low. Some people define low carb diet as less than 130 grams a day. Remember, 130 grams a day is kind of the minimum recommended amount to prevent ketosis. And then some say as low as 50 grams of carb a day, or less than 10% of your calories are carb. And some are less than 25 grams of carbohydrate a day. So when you look at the literature on low carb diets, a lot of people cite evidence for the keto diet when the actual studies are on low carb diets that do not meet the qualifications of keto. The keto diet is very high in fat, 70 to 80% calories from fat. And remember, the AMDR is 25 to 35% 20 to 35% calories from fat. So it's a very high fat diet. It's moderate in protein, 10 to 20% calories from protein, very low in carbohydrate, 5 to 10% calories from carbohydrate, which is 20 to 50 grams a day. Depending on your activity level, the higher your activity level, the higher the carbohydrate. So the ketogenic diet includes no starchy vegetables, fruits, legumes or beans or whole grains. It can be high in cholesterol and saturated fat depending on what animal protein sources are chosen. So in terms of the evidence, first we'll look at the evidence for weight loss. Short-term low carbohydrate and very low carbohydrate diets may, in fact, result in greater weight loss than low calorie, high carbohydrate, low fat diets. So over the short term, there seems to be more weight loss on low carbohydrate diets than on low fat diets. Longer term studies suggest that the weight loss is very similar between the two. The very low carb diets are not clearly superior for weight loss compared with other diets that allow more carbohydrates and people with overweight and obesity. And, one of the things we mentioned in the obesity section is one of the hallmarks of the appropriate diet for a person for weight loss is something that they can sustain. And that's kind of what I'm seeing with the keto diet. I know several people who have tried keto several times for weight loss, and they lose a lot of weight every time they try it, but they can't maintain it, and then they gain the weight back plus some. So, on the short term, low carb diets do result in more weight loss, but on the long term, it seems like the weight loss compared to other regimens seems to even out. So in the review articles, and that Kilpatrick article that's referenced at the bottom is a really good current review article. I would take a look at that if you're really interested in keto. There are some benefits for weight loss, but the authors conclude the sustainability could be difficult. So as far as, a lot of people are worried about a very high fat diet and blood lipids, like your cholesterol and triglyceride levels. So since it's so high in fat, won't it increase your blood lipids? The results are conflicting, and, your blood lipids will improve while you're losing weight. So if the person is on keto and losing weight, you don't know if the improvement in blood lipids is due to the weight loss or the ketogenic diet. Basically, what the authors of that really good review article indicated that there seem to be genetic factors that play a role in a person's blood lipid response to the ketogenic diet. They found that people with certain genetic markers may have problems with a ketogenic diet that's high in saturated fat. You don't know if you have that genotype. So it may be wise to, if you adopt the keto diet, make sure that you consume healthier fats than saturated fats. Some people seem to be able to tolerate saturated fats. Other people have genetic markers or genetic profile where their blood lipids will be adversely affected by high saturated fat diet. So the recommendation is for a person who adopts a ketogenic diet or a high-fat diet is to measure their blood lipids before they start the diet and reassess frequently to make sure that they're a person whose blood lipids don't adversely respond to the ketogenic diet. So as far as blood sugar control, again, in the short term, you see reductions in the A1C, and remember that is the measure of the average blood sugar over the past 3 months or so for someone with diabetes or prediabetes. So the blood sugars improve compared to hypocaloric or low-calorie, low-fat diet. But again, within about a year, the benefit seems to of the keto diet seems to diminish, or low carbohydrate seems to diminish. Low carbohydrate diets, if the person does adhere to them, do result in a reduction in the use of diabetes medications for the people who have diabetes. One of the things that we recommend is that if a person with diabetes wants to go keto, they need to be closely supervised medically and test their blood sugars more often, because their medications will probably have to be adjusted. There are certain people who should not adopt a ketogenic diet or a very low carbohydrate diet. People with the history of high blood triglycerides and pancreatitis. A high-fat diet can actually trigger pancreatitis, and that did happen in a friend of mine. Severe high triglycerides, people with severe high triglycerides should avoid the ketogenic diet, and people with inherited or the familial hypercholesterolemia that we talked about in the lipid section. So potential issues with the ketogenic diet, both very low and very high carbohydrate intakes have been associated with higher risk of mortality overall. Moderate carbohydrate intake has been associated with the lowest risk of mortality. Now remember that associations don't mean cause and effect. So this isn't proof of anything. It's just kind of something to think about when you're interpreting, or when you're developing your opinion. Another issue is a ketogenic diet could be high in red meat. Not necessarily, but red meat is associated with some harmful effects, may increase the risk for type 2 diabetes. Red meat intake, like we talked about in the protein section, can increase the production of these substances called TMAOs by the gut microflora, and which are carcinogenic. So, that could be an issue if the intake is high in red meat. The high intake of red meat can increase the risk of gout, which is an arthritis-like condition. It's an inflammation of the joints that's incredibly painful, especially the big toe of all things. Let's see, ketosis is dehydrating, so the person has to be very aware of that, and especially when they first go on the keto diet, there's a couple of weeks, it can be up to 3 weeks, where they experience what's called the keto flu, which is where you feel just awful as you're trying to adapt from using carbohydrates for energy to fat for energy. And with the increased urination from the ketosis, you lose a lot of minerals. So mineral supplements, lots of water are really important. So in reality, most people who do keto actually don't do the real keto diet. They're more keto-ish. If there's a cheat day on your keto regimen, you're not really true keto. A lot of people are saying that I'm dirty keto. One of the positive things about the ketogenic diet or the keto diet is that you're supposed to not consume processed foods on it. Dirty keto, they allow processed food like pork rinds and things like that. The one good thing about the ketogenic diet is it may help reduce carbohydrate cravings. So here's a case study, and I happen to know this person very well because I'm related to him. He was 27 years old, was diagnosed with prediabetes and prehypertension. He adopted a keto-ish diet and committed to exercise. And 2.5 years later, he had lost 115 pounds, now I think 120 pounds. No longer has prediabetes or hypertension, and he's maintained the weight loss for over 4 years. The keto diet, what he told me is that it reduced his cravings for carbohydrates, and sweet foods. He had a major sweet tooth. And so his roommate told me the first 3 weeks living with him were pretty hard when he switched to keto. As going through the keto flu, you get kind of grumpy, but eventually he kind of adapted to that. And although he no longer, considers himself true keto, he does adhere to a lower carbohydrate diet that's low in processed foods. and it's a lot healthier than his previous eating habits. So this is a case where this person benefited from going on what he thought was a keto regimen. His lifestyle actually very much improved and his health very much improved. So when people tell me they want to go on the keto diet, I tell them, well, what does the keto diet mean to you? And a lot of times it's just a lower carbohydrate diet where they eliminate refined foods. And so sometimes, when people go on what they say is a keto diet, it actually is an improvement that can result in health benefits. The thing is it sustainable? And for this person, it is sustainable. For other people I know, and this happened with the Atkins diet, which is a high protein, high fat diet that's low in carbohydrate. The difference between Atkins and keto is Atkins allows more protein. The keto doesn't allow, is moderate in protein because some amino acids, as you know from the protein section, can be converted to glucose. So I've been through 2 Atkins revolutions and have seen them backfire, where people say, oh, I always lose weight on Atkins, so I'm going to go on it again. I'm like, well, was it really successful for you if you gain the weight back and then some? So, maybe there's some things about keto that are beneficial for some people. So, I think, more research needs to be done. We haven't had enough time for very long-term studies. I think the longest-term studies are about 2 years. One of the main criticisms is there's a lot of dropouts in the study, and a lot of people find it difficult to sustain. Okay, so I'm going to stop this here, and then I'm going to talk about intermittent fasting in the next video clip.